Good morning. Thank you, Councillor. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Thanks for your patience. We have achieved quorum. Oh, no worries, no worries. I guess at this point, does committee wish to move report CSD 35 2017? That's agenda item 5.3, and consent items for information CSD 13 and 14 to immediately following the delegations on the same matter, which is agenda item 4. This way, the whole matter can be discussed all around the same time and not throughout the agenda. Moved by Councillor Volpatti, seconded by Councillor Easton. Thanks for that. All those in favor of moving the agenda? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you very much. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this morning? Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Indirect pecuniary interest. All matters regarding development charges, as a family business is affected by those policies.
It's noted. Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this time, we don't have presentations, but we do have delegations. I'd like to call upon Mr. Piccioni. I hope I pronounced that correctly. President, RCI Consulting. Chief Legal Officer, Losani Homes. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Bill Liskey and I are here today to speak to, in particular, the proposed transition policy for the Regional Development Charges Bylaw Update, Report CSD 35-2017. On April 24th, I sent a letter on behalf of Losani Homes to this committee requesting that their application for brownfields and smart growth DC reduction for the fifth wheel project in Grimsby be grandfathered under the rules for exemption under the current DC bylaw. Bill and I then met with staff, regional staff, on May 9th, and we last appeared before this committee on May 10th. So today I will be primarily speaking to the staff report itself, while Bill will be speaking primarily to what this proposed transition policy means for Losani Homes. So just briefly, Losani Homes has already been approved for the 50% brownfield DC reduction, and on May 22nd, we submitted a complete and comprehensive application for the 50% smart growth DC reduction. So unlike some of the other projects listed in this staff report, our applications are complete. They've been submitted. So as far as meeting the requirements, we've met the requirements. We also are on record as requesting grandfathering as early back as November of last year. So we aren't Johnny-come-lately to this. We've been consistent in requesting grandfathering for this project. When we last met with staff on May 9th, and when we presented here just 3 weeks ago, we were very clear in our message to staff and to this committee regarding our requirements for these transition provisions. We told staff and this committee that what Losani Homes needs when it comes to municipal incentives, and in particular in this case, what every developer needs, frankly, when making multi-million-dollar investment decisions like this, is predictability and certainty. Developers need to be able to rely on the incentive program commitments made by the region, and unfortunately, that is not the case at all with this transition report. When we met with staff back on May 9th, we did in fact discuss what was going to be put forward, and unfortunately, this is not what we had anticipated, and certainly not what we anticipated when we came and presented to this committee and heard what the committee itself had to say. So let me be clear, we are not arguing the new rates. We are not arguing the new rules. What's going to happen, that's fine. We made a simple request, and it was responded to with a very complex and confusing report, frankly. Our simple request is this, that the existing rules in place since 2004 be applied to this project, because these are the rules upon which Losani Homes relied on to make its investment decision to purchase, remediate, and redevelop this large brownfield site in Grimsby as a showcase smart growth project. And Losani Homes has actually submitted and will be approved for their applications under the existing rules. So this is really a simple request. We're just asking the region to honor the commitment it made under the DC reduction program and rules. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, as I said, unfortunately, the transition policy proposed in the staff report in no way addresses this request and my client's needs. The proposed transition policy is of absolutely no meaning or consequence for a major brownfield redevelopment project like my client's project, and I will explain why. But at the end of the day, it provides not $1 of the promised relief to my client. I completed a detailed review of the staff report and would like to raise a number of issues in the report. First and foremost, the proposed transition period is a mere 16 months from the time of the end of the existing DC bylaw. This period is far too short when one considers that it takes 10 years or more to acquire, plan, remediate, and build out a brownfield redevelopment project of this scale. We're talking about 1,100 plus residential units. If the RSC process and balance of the planning process goes very smoothly, which it doesn't necessarily have to, but if it does, just assuming it does, Los Annie Homes would still be fortunate to pull just a fraction, just a few of the permits, the 1,100 plus permits, by December 31st, 2018. It's impossible. It can't be done, okay? As we stated previously, it's going to take upwards of 10 years to complete this massive project. So 16 months of transition time does not even come close to being acceptable or realistic. If this project is not grandfathered and the new DC rules are applied to it, this will cost Los Annie Homes up to an extra $14.5 million in development charges on this project. Now, even if my client could pull all its permits before December 31st, 2018, which, as I've stated, is impossible, the proposed transition policy does not make my client whole, not even to start. According to the formulas proposed in the report, Los Annie Homes would still pay, even if they pulled all their permits by December 31st, 2018, over $4.1 million. So setting aside this ridiculously short transition period of 16 months, how is that a transition policy? A transition policy is designed to apply the existing rules for a set period of time before the new rules kick in, not invent formulas or schemes for approved applicants to pay more than they would have otherwise paid during the transition period. So I don't even consider this a transition policy. The staff report talks about leveling the playing field between brownfield and greenfield sites. That's a nice concept, but I would like to respectfully remind staff and committee members that this is not a game. My client is risking hundreds of millions of dollars to invest in Niagara, and this proposed transition policy responds to that commitment with a Band-Aid transition that continues to propose that council can do away with the 50% smart growth DC reduction without even amending the DC bylaw. There's no certainty there. That smart growth DC reduction alone is worth $7 million of the $14.5 million. Now, even if you want to consider this a game, and I would caution staff and committee in doing that, but even if you do, I know of no game where the rules are changed mid-period to the detriment of one team. I know of no game where that team is then told, oh, and by the way, the rules may be amended or eliminated again before the game is over. Whether or not one considers this a game, we must conclude that this transition policy is simply not fair play. The staff report states that the proposed program is similar to the City of Hamilton Erased Development Charge Reduction Program because it limits the brownfield reduction to the eligible costs of remediation. Again, we're not arguing that new rule, simply that this new rule should not apply to a brownfield project that is already underway and already approved for DC reduction. Having said that, I can tell you as the architect of Hamilton's Erased program and the consultant that's reviewing it right now, that this statement is frankly misleading. While Hamilton's program does limit the DC reduction to the cost of remediation, in addition to that DC reduction, Hamilton's program also offers the developer the ability to recoup a host of other costs, including remediation costs over and above development charges payable, demolition costs, infrastructure upgrading costs, and lead construction costs. And it does that through first a 10-year freeze on city property taxes, and then up to a 10-year tax increment grant on top of that. So in Hamilton, you get the DC reduction, and you can also get up to 20 years of tax abatement. Nothing like that's available for this project in Grimsby, because Grimsby doesn't have a brownfield CIP in place. So it's really misleading to compare the two. The staff report claims that the impact of not having a transition policy will be $56 million. However, when you really dig down and actually examine the 16 projects included in that $56 million figure, what we find is that, first of all, there's no indication as to which projects have actually applied for and been approved for the brownfield and smart growth reduction. The report lumps projects in designated central areas in together with brownfield projects. That artificially inflates the cost. If the project in the designated exemption areas are removed, that significantly reduces the cost. And those projects, even if they were not brownfields, would be eligible for DC reduction. And finally, the report includes $24.5 million of the $56 million for Prudhomme's Landing. Secondary plan hasn't even been finished for Prudhomme's Landing, and it may not be completed and approved before this bylaw expires. So I'm not sure why Prudham's Landing's been included. Furthermore, the town is preparing a community improvement plan for Prudham's Landing. I know this because I'm the consultant preparing that plan. So that means that there may be incentives available there through the town and the region's Smarter Niagara Incentive programs. Again, those are not available in Grimsby for this project. So correcting for all of this, the actual impact of grandfathering bona fide, approved brownfield projects with smart growth reductions, that's what we're talking about here with Lausanne today. That's what I'll be talking about with Mars Homes. That's what we're requesting the grandfathering for. The actual impact won't be $56 million. It'll be 15 to a maximum of $20 million. So finally, as I stated in my concluding remarks when I was last before you, we do understand that this decision is about fairness and equity. We also understand staff's perspective that it is about money. So to be fair, let's look at the money side. The region will collect $2.7 million and the town will collect $1.7 million in annual property taxes on this project for a total of almost $4.5 million. Looking just at the region's share, that means that the region's development charge reduction for this project, if it is $14.5 million, would be repaid by property tax revenues to the region in 5.3 years. After that, the region will continue to collect $2.7 million in property taxes every year. In other words, this project, even if you look at it just financially, pays for itself in 5.5 years. So in addition to being the right thing to do from a fairness, equity, certainty, and predictability perspective, and the commitment that the region has made to provide these incentives, it also makes financial sense. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Bill, and Bill's going to talk a little bit about the perspective from the Lausanne Homes view on this, and I will be staying around to listen to the staff presentation, and I'm available to answer any questions you might have either right now or after the staff presentation. Bill?
Mr. Pachona, I will advise you've taken up the full 10 minutes. However,
I didn't last time, so I think we should have a couple minutes leeway.
No, allow me to finish, please. I do want to caution, so for the next speaker, in fairness, please try to be brief.
Yeah.
There is, Mr. Pachona, you're presenting again for another 10 minutes.
No, I won't.
For
That'll
another
be
client.
2 minutes. It'll be a...
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Through you, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity. Good morning. I will be brief. I think Luciana was comprehensive, so I'll just add maybe 2 minutes of color. We're 3 years into an 8-year program, 8 to 10-year program to get construction underway. I would be a 2 or 3 year program if it weren't for the brownfield taking so long. So what we're asking for is that the bylaw, which has a 5-year term, grandfather Lausanne Homes for that 5-year term, and we can come back at 5 years and then reapply if we need more time. We'll speak to committee at that time if there's unforeseen delays. So we're hoping that the grandfathering is not 18 months or 16 months, it's actually the 5-year term of the bylaw renewal. My notes indicate that I could mention that if the grandfathering is not given, it will delay the project. It may stop the project. It may increase costs and appeals. But I'd rather not go down that road because I believe that the committee will do the right thing and grant the grandfathering in the sense of fairness. I have a copy of the plan with me, and I'm just finishing up now. I understand we're in a hurry. If there's any members of the committee that want to go over the plan to see how it's morphed and what the intentions are and how it looks, I'd be happy to sit down and show you and actually be excited about the project rather than arguing. I'd like to thank you for your time.
Great, thanks for that. With that said, are there any questions by committee members for either of the presenters? Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Luch. You mentioned that you have put the application in currently. Has it been accepted by the staff as of yet?
Staff have acknowledged receipt of the application, and my understanding is they're currently reviewing it. Typically, the review period for these applications is a few weeks.
And when does our current bylaw expire?
August 31st, 2017.
So you have put an application in under the current bylaw?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Height.
Yes, through you to the presenter. The other gentleman said a 5-year grandfathering instead of 1.5 years. You're suggesting forever. Forever doesn't work. Things change. Why wouldn't you have come forward suggesting 3 years, 5 years?
Through the chair, we had originally requested no time limit because of the scope and scale of the project. In discussions with Bill this morning, he said that he feels that Lozani Homes can commit to 5 years, but with the proviso that during that 5-year period, it be revisited prior to the next DC bylaw, and that they be provided an opportunity to give this committee, whoever's sitting around the table, and council at that time, an update on where the project's at in terms of number of permits. There also may be some flexibility within that 5-year period to advance taking of permits. Even if they're not quite ready to throw the building up right away, they can get the permits and then proceed one building to the next. So that's the position that my client is taking right now, is that they would be amenable to and acceptable if it was extended for the full 5-year term of the next DC bylaw.
Okay, through to either one of you, gentlemen, and you're running a business, you're buying property, you're anticipating growth, you're anticipating profit, and that's necessary, no question about that. But if we get full development charges that you don't want to pay, that means every unit's going to cost an extra $8,000 or $9,000. And you're suggesting it's going to harm you. It's really going to harm the purchaser, or the time that you can sell the property if the individuals aren't willing to pay whatever the market rate is at that time. Is that not correct? So instead of the unit being $180,000 for an apartment, it could be, or 200, or that's probably wrong, 300. It's going to be $308,000, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, correct. There's a provision in the standard sale agreements that says that from the point of sale to the point of actually pulling the permit, the increase in development charges is passed on to the customer, and it's been very controversial. School boards have had this passed on. They've taken exception to it. Developers should be eating the cost of development charges, but that flies in the face of business, which is the taxes that are applicable at the point of sale are what the buyer pays. So what I'm saying is that buyers of the fifth wheel project, when it's sold to the end user and customers, won't have that risk of having to take on development charge increases as part of their adjustments on closing. In this case, if the development charge grandfathering is given, the regional development charges, whether increased or not, will not be passed on to the home buyers.
Okay. You weren't at yesterday's committee meetings, and I wouldn't blame you for not sitting through them. But when we were talking about water and wastewater, they're looking at, over the next 25 years, needing about $800 million, of which about 2/3 would be coming from development charges. If we don't collect the development charges from you, we're going to be spreading it throughout the whole region, and everyone's going to have to pay. Is that fair because it's for new development? I don't think it's that fair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the Brownfield Incentive Program was to get development going in order to pay for that infrastructure through tax revenue. The reason why the incentive program, as it was 3 years ago when Lozani Homes started buying into the program, was because you could actually turn that unperforming site into something that's going to create the tax revenue to, on an investment basis, bring that rate of return back to the coffers for the region of Niagara. So it is an investment. It'll take some time to get back, but it's better than the other alternative, which was an underperforming truck stop in the center of the Winston neighborhood.
Last question. I think you stated it's been about 3 years you've owned the property and you're looking 3 to 8. Well, my math is simple. 8 minus 3 is 5. The other gentleman's saying 5 and maybe another 5. You're suggesting 5 and an opportunity for further. You aren't suggesting just 5. Why not just 5-year grandfathering instead of 1.5 years that they're advising us would be acceptable?
Thank you again through the chair. Great questions. The trigger time for payment of development charges is the pulling of the permit. So in order to get there, we have those stages of draft plan approval, sale, servicing, engineering approvals, servicing, and then when the site's ready for construction, then we can go in and apply for the permits. That process will take 5 years. It should take 2 years to get to the draft plan approval process. So when I say 5 years, I think on a normal timeline, we should be able to be in there with our permit applications submitting to the town of Grimsby for construction within that 5-year period. Unforeseen circumstances could be where the residents of the area appeal, and in which case there may be a year or two lost to the OMB. These are the sorts of things that we'd want to come back to committee in 5 years and say, beyond our control, things happened and we need more time.
Well, sorry, just one more question. A problem with that is extending it too long gives you an opportunity to sit on land instead of coming to us saying, yes, we're going to develop. And in a sense, we want to give you an incentive to develop now so we can get the taxes. But you can just keep sitting on this saying, well, we ran into problems, we need another 7 years. I don't want to hear that. I probably won't be sitting here, but that's a problem that I have as a counselor, extending 5, 10 years down the road. I want to see the development now. You've bought it for 3 years. You've run into some issues. That's an issue that I think a lot of us have in our minds, that we just can't give an extension to the developer forever. That's an opinion I have.
Through you, Mr. Chair, all great questions. So just to address the idea that Lizani Homes may sit on the property, I think that the request that I'm asking was tailored to answer that question. So if we're given the 5-year term of the bylaw with an opportunity to speak to it to committee in 5 years when the bylaw is up for renewal, we don't have the guarantee that it's going to be renewed. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure we get in the ground in time. So it provides an incentive for us, but also an opportunity to explain to committee again if there was something that happened. And committee then will have to choose whether we sat on the property or not. And if we sat on the property, my guess is committee would not grant a further grandfathering beyond the 5-year term.
Thank you. Councillor Volpatti.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. What is the amount of the reduction available to you under the current regime, the current brownfield incentive program?
Through the chair, if the project achieves the smart growth reduction along with the brownfield reduction that's already been approved, it's $14.5 million.
Right. And what was the cost of the remediation of this site? Is it complete?
I'm not exactly sure. Bill, do you know what it is?
It's not complete. No.
Yeah, it's not complete yet, so I don't know.
Do you have an estimate that you can use? Through you, Chair.
Currently, we don't have an estimate. There's a groundwater monitoring program that's required, and we haven't excavated underneath the, through the chair. We haven't excavated underneath the truck wash, so we don't know what's in the ground there.
So what, through you to one further question. So what are your costs to date in remediation?
Through the chair, I apologize. I'm not aware of our cost to date.
I think I'd like to know those figures. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Campion.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, you're probably will be happy to hear and not surprised that my municipality supports pretty much everything that you guys have said. And so I'll be trying to convince the rest of council to follow suit. What we would like to do, what I'd like to see happen is that we would just not change the bylaw for 5 years. So not go through this process now and then go through the process 5 years. So leave it static for predictability, your issues that you brought forward. Having said that, if we move forward, if we manage to get that to happen, in your mind, what would be the best time to start talking about the next step 5 years down the road? We can't start talking about it 5 years down the road. We have to talk about it before that. And so into talking about transitional issues and things like that. In your mind, when should that discussion start if we keep the bylaw in place for 5 years?
Through the chair, that's a very forward-looking question, and I think the ideal time would be there is going to be a review of the Smarter Niagara incentive programs that's going to be conducted. Basically, all of the incentive programs that are offered by the regional municipality. My understanding is that review will commence in the fall. Ideally, that review should have been done hand in hand with this DC bylaw. And then perhaps we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. But regardless, that would be a good time to start to look at and put out there that these changes are going to happen and these are the changes we're considering. Because then again, if you have a Lozani Homes in that situation, they know, okay, maybe we're not going to buy this site. You know, to some of the previous speakers' questions, the bottom line is that when Lozani Homes did its pro forma and decided to purchase this site, it was based on the DC reductions in place at that time, which are still currently in place and will be in place until August 31st. So it's not just about what the cleanup cost is, we'll get this much back, 50% reduction development charges for being a brownfield. We'll get 50% back if we build a smart growth project, which this one I'm very confident will be. And that's the numbers that went into the pro forma. So those numbers are now being changed dramatically by the transition policy. And that, from a business investments decision, is really the dilemma that they have. But yes, as soon as the programs start to be reviewed, that would be a good time to talk about and get out there that this is what we're thinking about in terms of changes.
Thank you.
Councillor Edgar, and then Councillor Volpatti for a second time.
Thank you, Chair. Was Lozani Homes not aware of the term of the DC bylaws in place when they did the pro forma?
I can answer. The term of the DC bylaw is always 5 years, and all developers are aware of that. This program for exemption has been in this DC bylaw for the better part of 13 years. So it was certainly not anticipated that it would be changed, and it certainly was not anticipated that it would be changed to this degree, to the point of having 100% DC reduction going to 0. And so you can imagine how difficult that is for a developer to try and incorporate that into a revised pro forma. So I think they were very realistic in their expectations. The program's been around for 13, 14 years. You know, they know it's going to be reviewed in 5 years, but they certainly didn't anticipate that that it was going to be completely eliminated. And that's essentially what's happening here. There is the potential for council to come back on the smart growth DC reduction, which is half of the 14.5 million, and say, without amending the bylaw, without even having a public meeting, we're doing away with this program. And there are indications in this report. Again, as I said, I reviewed it in great detail. I used to write these kinds of reports. There's indications in there that that is exactly what might happen, because through this review, the program, the smart growth reduction program, will either be reduced or potentially eliminated. There's just not enough certainty there for them. And I think that's where Bill is coming back and saying, the minimum certainty we need is this 5 years with an opportunity to revisit. If you give us that, we'll go ahead with this project. If you don't get any development charges. You don't get $2.7 million a year in property tax revenues either.
I would be surprised to see, Mr. Chair, through you, I would be surprised to see us eliminate the smart growth program. Everything going nowadays seems to be targeting smaller, better growth, less spread. So I don't buy that part of it.
So take through you, the chair, take that policy out then. Take that ability for council to just get rid of it out. If you don't see that happening, and you don't see the people who are going to be around this table seeing that happening in 5 years, you know, there's an election next year. We don't know who's going to be sitting around this table.
No, that's for sure.
So take it out. That solves half the problem right there. Because then Lozani Homes has confidence that this program is still going to be there for 5 years.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Volpatti?
Thank you, Chair, for the leniency. Just to ask, the questions I was asking about the reduction to date or forecast, if the staff is aware of what those amounts are. Through you, Chair.
So I'll ask staff to prepare, because we'll have an opportunity to ask questions of staff when the report.
Oh, okay.
if I may,
Well,
through
the report's on the floor now, I think.
No, it's just the delegate. So,
Oh.
Mr. Mustachi, if you don't mind holding that,
Yeah.
we'll have questions of staff
All right,
at the
thank
appropriate time. Thank you. I do have a question as well, seeing no other speakers on the list, to the presenter. With respect to Mr. Piccioni, you mentioned you read the report. And Appendix 4, there's a transition provision 2, which moves the expiration to December 31st, 2020. Is that something that would be a little more palatable to you, your client?
Through to the chair, that transition policy is identical to transition provision number 1, except that it extends the time period to December 31st, 2020. And again, with the scale of this project, it's not acceptable. I mean, not enough of the units will get in under this transition provision. Furthermore, this isn't a straight transition provision. It's not, if you're in by December 31st, 2020, you don't pay, which is the situation right now under the current bylaw. They're actually applying sort of a made-up charge during the transition period that we wouldn't pay under the current bylaw. So it's not really a straight transition policy. So combining those two things, it's simply not acceptable for a project of this scale. It just doesn't work.
Okay, thanks for that. With those comments, I want to be clear as well to those who may be watching on live stream or others, that the committee is not approving the development charge bylaw today. It's just the consideration of adding an appendix to the draft bylaw, which will still be circulated and there'll still be further public discussion, et cetera. So that Mr. Piccioni and Mr. Liskey, I hope I got that right. Lisk, thank you. Thanks for your time this morning. Oh, Councillor D'Angela for these presenters.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. This is more of a general question through you, Mr. Chair, to the speakers. In your opinion, what impact will if the council changes this and puts that provisional bylaw in place, or provisional component of it, what impact will this have on the development industry as a whole in terms of how they feel towards council and investment going into the future? I know this is a specific project, but we always talk about being open for business. Is this something council will be giving a clear indication that we're open for business in Niagara and working with our developers, or is it an indication that, hey, we got to worry about getting our revenues in and not specifically interested in the business community development? Maybe if you could elaborate, give your opinion on that.
Certainly. Through the chair, and Bill and I will both answer this question. It does two things in the short to medium term. It puts projects like this in immediate jeopardy, in particular, if there is any downturn in the market. And there may be. So you can imagine a performer like this gets squeezed and then the market turns down. This project could get stopped dead in its tracks. And it's not just this project, it's some of the other projects too. In the long term, unfortunately, it puts the message out there to the development community that the region of Niagara is not averse to changing the rules on you in midstream, in mid-project. And that's not a good business message at all. And I personally will not be able to tell my developer clients or advise my developer clients to look at and invest in Niagara, as I have been doing. I will simply have to stop doing that. And I won't be the only consultant who will have to stop doing that. I won't be the only real estate agent, lawyer, accountant who will stop doing that. This is going to send a very bad message, in particular with respect to brownfield redevelopment, which, as I understand it, was the #1 priority of this council. So that's, from my end, what it'll mean. Bill, would you like to add some comments?
No, that was very good.
Okay.
Councillor?
Mr. Chair, just a follow-up secondary question because you're more familiar with it. How many potential brownfield sites or projects are potentially out there for Niagara? I know we have quite a bit of properties, but since you're more into the industry, can you give an indication of potentially what sort of impact that could have by some comments that you've made there?
Certainly. Through the chair, literally there are thousands of brownfield sites in Niagara. I have no doubt. I've prepared most of the brownfield community improvement plans across the region for the various local municipalities. And when we looked at the sites that were known, not even sites that haven't been discovered yet, we're talking a huge number of sites. To give you a parallel, we look at Hamilton's program, which I'm currently reviewing. It's been in place for about 15 years. They've had 51 projects go through that program, and 24 of those are now remediated and completed. And those, once all the projects are remediated and completed, it'll be about $500 million in investment. Just the projects that have been completed to date, the 24 in Hamilton, the leverage ratio on those is 11 times. So for every dollar that Hamilton put into DC reduction or tax increment grants, they got $11 back in construction value. And they're over $4 million a year in property tax revenue just on the projects that have been completed. So there is a payback. It just takes time. And I imagine and fully expect that Niagara could be at that position if it continues to offer these types of incentives within 5 to 8 years. You're just following in their footsteps, essentially, and because you started later. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank the presenters for your presentation and for your other comments. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. Seeing no other questions or comments, thanks. Ms. Piccione, I guess you're welcome to stay there, and we'll move on to the second delegation that you have representing another client. Thank you, Mr. Lisk.
Thank you. And my comments will be brief, and I do appreciate the ability to go over the 10 minutes for the first presentation. Dan Gabriel from Mars Homes was not able to be here today. His daughter is graduating from Kingston University, so he's up there attending the graduation. Basically, the same principles that I talked about for the Lozani Homes application apply here. Really, the only difference is that this project is further along, and the smart growth DC reduction component has already been approved. So the cost for this project is much more modest. It's $205,000. But when you look at the scale of the project being much smaller, it's still very significant. So we indicated when we were last here that Mars Homes would be fine with, again, this extending to the end of the term of the next DC bylaw. So they are confident and willing to commit to building that mixed-use building, which is what they will have left by August 31st, 2022, or getting the permit for that building. And there's the difference, right? This is a small project. They're halfway through. They can make that commitment. Lozani Homes doesn't have a shovel in the ground and won't for 2 years. It's impossible for them to say they will have all their units permitted in 5 years. But again, Bill described to you what they're willing to do. We want to make this work. We don't want this to be adversarial. So now this is interesting because the report really speaks to how capping the remediation costs for the DC payable would work for a small project. But here we have a small project, typical brownfield redevelopment project, 59 residential units, 5,000 square feet of commercial space. And the transition policy at December 31st, 2018 doesn't work for them either. So I just don't think it works, and it needs to be completely revisited. That's my comments for Mars Homes.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from committee members on the second delegation? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Piccione. Appreciate your time this morning. At this point, I'd like to call upon Mr. Tim Collins, if he's here. So it doesn't seem that he is here, so that wraps up the delegations today. With that, we do have the related items. I'll move to the consent items for information first, and then the staff report. So is there a mover and seconder for CSC 13 and 14? That's the letter from Welland and one from Fort Erie respecting the matter we're discussing today. Moved by Councillor Nunziata, seconded by Councillor Campion. Are there any questions or comments about either of those letters from the respective municipalities? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you. And we'll move the report CSD 35. That's the draft Regional Development Charges Bylaw Update Transition. Moved by Councillor Patty. Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Seconder for the report, Councillor Quirk. Thanks. That report is now on the floor, and I guess if I may go to Reno to ask the question, Commissioner Mostachi, that you asked earlier. Commissioner?
If I may, Chair, could you recap the question just so I'm crystal clear on what the information is?
Do we know the amount of the DC reduction available to Lozani and the projects that they were presenting on under the current brownfield incentive program?
Yep. So that's a good question. So under the current bylaw, which is the current rates, the total development charge, the total development charges payable based on the concept plan that they have today is about 6.2 million, of which 50% would be the brownfield portion, and 50%, the other half, would be eligible through the smart growth incentive. It's an important distinction because under the new bylaw, the rates are going up. So that 6.2 becomes 14.9, okay? So there's a significant difference there. With that 14.9, half would still be eligible for smart growth, and the other half 7.4, if you will. Sorry, yeah, about 7.4 would be brownfield. So there's a delta there of about 4.4 million between the new bylaw and the old bylaw. And I hope that clarifies. The other thing that, since I have the floor, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to recap the process as far as the planning application. So Mr. Piccioni is correct. They've acquired this property a number of years ago. And we've been actually working with, because it's such a significant location within the region in terms of the town of Grimsby and everything that's happening with the future mobility center there, we've been actively working with Lausanne, and they've been very receptive with respect to the concept. We do want this to be a premier showcase location, and they've been responding with, you know, architects and planners who have experience in waterfront master planning in the GTA. So there's been a lot of work. When the question was asked, has the application been received? The planning application per se, the complete application, has not yet been received. It's in process. I anticipate it will be received before the expiry of this development charge bylaw. There's a lot of background studies that have to be completed, but I believe that they're working actively to get that planning application in. The application that was referenced that's been received is the pre-approval, I guess the notion that they intend to develop and apply for brownfield reduction and smart growth incentives. We typically review that and give the developer an indication of qualification. And so that's what we're in the process of reviewing right now. And I just provide that information for context. I hope it's helpful.
Great.
Very much so, thank you.
And thank you very much for that. And just one further question, and that is, I mean, the presenters were not aware of the amount of remediation that has been done and the extent of it. Is staff aware of that, through your chair? How much remediation has been done in this site?
Commissioner Burgess.
Through the chair, the presenter did provide information to staff with regards to an estimate, but we don't think it's appropriate to divulge that without their permission. It was during a meeting. But I would point to you know, some of the key facts in the report and some of the situations that are outlined in the report. One of those situations does cover off the Lausanne's situation with regards to the cost of remediation in comparison to the DC grant relief.
Right. So if the remediation cost doesn't equal the DC grant relief, where are we left then, through your chair? Through the commissioner, to the commissioner.
Through the chair, as stated in key fact number 5 of the report, you know, the key issues relates to developments that would, under existing bylaws, obtain development charge exemptions exceeding the actual cost of remediation. What the new bylaw proposed is that you would get DC relief up into the cost of remediation, and the intent of the new bylaw is to provide DC relief to remediate properties and the brownfield cost. You can have situations where
you can or you can't?
You can, currently under the current bylaw, you can have a situation where it costs you $1 million to remediate the property, and you could get, you know, several $1 million of DC relief for that, because it's 50% of the DCs. The new bylaw would tie it more to the actual cost of remediation.
So then that, if they get their application in before the new bylaw expires, they will be entitled to whatever the total estimated cost is and not the actual cost. Is that where we
Commissioner
are?
Mostachi?
That's what we're reviewing right now. I just wanted to provide some additional context with respect to the existing policy and why it is the way it is. There's no cap on remediation. I wasn't around when it was developed, but I would assume that the thinking of the day was that it didn't anticipate developments of the scale that we're seeing today. You know, this is a very intensive, higher density style development. If it was a low density development, if it was a subdivision, it would not be generating nearly the development charges that this project is. And so I believe that the current policy was likely designed to, without a cap, because it wasn't anticipating the scale of development that we're seeing today. And so we are playing a little bit of catch up with respect to, you know, what's happening in the Niagara marketplace as far as the type of development. So for example, there's a direct relationship between the number of units, in this case about 1,100 units, and the development charge that's payable. If this developer chose to ignore the fact that we are looking for high density development and lowered the quantum of units, the development charge payable would be less, and thus the benefit would be less. So there's a relationship there between the type of development, the scale of development, and the charges payable. And just wanted to also to give that information to committee.
Thank you, Chair. It's clearer than mud. It's becoming clear that it's quite a complex situation that we're dealing with here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Patty. Councilor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question to the report. As I understand it, that we are, if we accept the recommendations as printed, we are including it for consideration. There was still another opportunity for comment as well as referral and changes at that point as well still. This is purely to get it to the posting stage where we take comments back.
Correct.
So I guess my other question is, we have not had a discussion or had sort of any update as to the effectiveness of these policies that I've seen from planning staff as to whether the brownfield incentive program has been effective. And following up with the Commissioner's latest comments, we are looking at higher density developments using these brownfield properties. I know, for example, in Grimsby, there's limited opportunities for growth. We are green belted, and our brownfields are one of the few places that we can do significant investments and meet our growth targets. So I have concerns about, again, changing the rules mid-game. But I would also suggest that we should be considering a more flexible transition policy. I know when we had the presentation that came here recently for the development in St. Catharines that was in midway, we actually came up with what I thought was very creative, a 5-year freeze and then a reduction over the further 5 years to ensure that the development took place in a timely manner. I think those are the sort of transitions that would provide some certainty on a go-forward basis. I would be happy to support a change that would allow a 5-year transition for any application that is received before the August 31st deadline and approved by the August 31st deadline, with the idea that any further relief would be reduced on a go-forward basis. And then you play within the field of the games. You play within the rule of the games you're given at this point. If this council decides that the brownfield investments is too generous, then we should be making that policy decision and changing that. If we think that the brownfield investment is not needed, I would suggest to you that there are still lots of brownfield properties. I know Welland is very clear on that there are lots of brownfield properties that could be developed. Again, and we look at development charges paying for growth, these are areas that have already had infrastructure put in the ground for the most part, and any new infrastructure is usually being covered by the developer anyway. So I'm okay to support this as it stands now, but I think there will have to be a greater discussion when we get the comments back and finding a transition policy that is more fair and equitable. Thank you.
On a point of order, Chair, I just want to say this in defense of staff and probably myself as the chair of development charges.
So
we had
Councilor,
two meetings
if I may,
without quorum.
it's not a point of order, but you're
Well,
welcome to join.
It's information.
You're welcome to join the
Thank
speakers
you.
list at the end of this. Thank you. Councilor Quirk, anything else while you still have the floor?
If I'd been on the Development Charges Bylaw Committee, I would have attended, but I'm not, so there.
Okay. Councilor Campion.
Yeah, me too, Councillor Quirk. I'd like to, now I learned. If possible, I would like to make an amendment to the resolution. I don't know if it would be acceptable.
It's in order, yeah.
But I'll give it a shot. So what I would like to do is item number 1 is amend that to change the word appendix the provision number 1, I would like to change that to item under the other consideration, which would be number 4 from CDS 35-217, which essentially says leave it alone and don't do anything for 5 years.
So I guess just so maybe clerks have clarity of exactly what the amendment is. So you want to,
Yeah, the amendment would be number 4 from page 6 of CDS 35-217, which is continued with the current RDC reduction program for 5 years, which is not recommended as cost of the funds was. It's just saying why it's not being suggested, but continue with the current RDC reduction program for 5 years. So I guess that would be the amendment, if it's acceptable.
thanks, we'll just confer for a moment, Councillor. So the amendment you've put on the floor is contrary, completely contrary. So, so you'd have to vote this one down to be able to put that forward?
So it's worth a shot, right?
We know where you're going.
Unfortunately, you guys all know the rules. So I think what I would recommend then is that we do vote this down and that we have an opportunity to just go with that, to leave it. The presenter made a very, very great argument as to why we would want to keep it for 5 years. You know, we require that predictability. So this is why I would vote against this particular motion, is because the predictability is necessary in the market, because these are long-term developments. They don't happen overnight. It takes a long, long time to get them going. It also is required for us to be able to promote our brownfields, because if there's not that predictability included in the process, you know, we can say, come down here, we've got these great incentive programs, we're gonna, you know, great DC reductions, et cetera, but you might not actually be able to access them because they could change next year. They could change at the whim of council at a certain point. So I think it's important to do that. Part of the issue, and the issue was very well presented, as I say, by the presenters, but you know, the concept of brownfields is that they're going to sit there idle for a long, long time. They're essentially liabilities that municipalities have at certain points. If, you know, there's no tax payments, or if they go into arrears, you know, what do we do with these properties? They're sitting around just waiting for something to happen. They're not producing any tax revenue, and the likelihood of them producing tax revenue in the short term or even in the midterm is very, very slim. So the incentive is necessary. So when we start providing and start looking at, well, we're just going to reduce the DC charges based on the amount of remediation, which is acceptable to the presenters, but it doesn't provide that extra incentive to actually get people to do the brownfield before they do a greenfield. And I think that's important to have that in there, or else it's just not going to happen. I think Councillor Quirk, while he was here, did mention one of the things that, you know, this is, you know, something that we really can use. It's going to make sense for us to, if we're moving forward, we have to have that built in. There is a concept in the report somewhere that this could be considered bonusing. It's not bonusing in a CIP area. That's what CIP areas are all about, is actually being able to provide those incentives. So I don't see where that really comes from. As Quirk also said, you know, a lot of that infrastructure is already in place for these brownfields. It's already been essentially paid for in the past. We're just reutilizing the facilities and the infrastructure that's already there. So I think it's really important for us to take advantage of this. We have to take a longer term look at it. The short term gain of the DC, okay, we're going to collect the DC in the short term and probably stop or hinder development. Why are we looking so short term? Why do we want that, you know, $14 million or whatever it is, at the expense of getting long-term revenue out of the tax revenue that we get through the development? So I think the argument is so strong that we should just leave it the way it is. I appreciate the answer we got. Almost immediately, we should start looking at what happens 5 years down the road and have those discussions before we hit the 5 years down the road. So I can't see the real strong argument against this. We were talking about taking the DC charge because we have future development. I get that, but we're not saying that we're, you know, reducing DC charges across the board. We're still going to get those. So the cost of it, I think, is minimal based on the tax revenues that we're going to be creating for, you know, essentially in perpetuity. And so I would strongly urge council to, or this committee to vote this down, and let's go with the status quo for another 5 years. We've heard it works. We've heard that it's not going to work if we eliminate them or make it more difficult. So let's show we're open for business. Let's show, you know, we do have these programs. We want you to invest in Niagara. We want you to invest in our communities in Niagara, and make it really, really clear by sending out that strong message that we're going to continue with these programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campion. Councillor Augustine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I totally 100% agree with Councillor Campion. He has identified each of the reasons why we should be leaving it as is. It provides certainty. It provides the incentives that are required. What staff have recommended, essentially saying capping it at the cost of the brownfield, means that you put it on a level playing field. Okay, but there isn't a level playing field currently with those brownfield sites. Currently, they're a blight, as Mayor Campion has stated. They're a blight on communities. What do we want to do? We want to incent development on those brownfields. Not only do we want the brownfields cleaned up, which is what this proposal is going to suggest, we actually want development to occur on those brownfields. Why? Because there was development there before. There may have been a factory there, and now it's sitting vacant. It's a blight. Let's not only clean these things up, let's incentivize those areas. To call it bonusing, as the report calls, is misleading. It's not bonusing, it's an incentive. It's to say, you know what, we want these things to be cleaned up and we want them to be developed. It's similar, as Councillor Campion said, with our downtowns. It's not bonusing in the downtowns, it's a recognition of the downtowns to say, this is where we want development to occur. If you look at successful communities across North America that are developing, that are growing, they're doing so in their downtowns. And they're also cleaning up their brownfields and incentivizing development on those brownfields. When you think about a community, you could clean up all the downtowns you want, which is what we're going to continue to do, I hope, with this development charge. And yet there might be a blight of industrial development, former industrial area. That has to be incentivized. That has to be added on. It's not like we haven't been doing this. Mr. Oakes is out there selling Niagara with this, and now we're going to change, and now it's going to affect huge development like this. We've heard from the commissioner, Mr. Chair, who said, oh, this is because the development is intense. That's what we want. That's the kind of development we want. And what's the ROI? What's the return on investment? Right now, as Mayor Campion said, right now these things are negative. There's no taxes there. They're going to go up for tax sale. They might not happen. We're not getting anything. So let's develop it. And it's like an annuity. It's like once they develop and build, they're going to be great tax-paying people for the rest, like forever. So I'm saying, I agree with Mayor Campion 100%. Let's leave it status quo. Let's give that certainty that people need. If there need to be tweaks in the future in 5 years' time, let's make those tweaks. Let's study it. Let's hold hands with the development community instead of hit them over the head. Let's vote this down and let's keep the incentives as they currently are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. If Mr. Luch, you want to come back up to the podium, because I think maybe you'll be able to answer this for me, but through the chair, how many of our partner municipalities have brownfield CIPs currently?
Off the top of my head, either with brownfield CIPs or brownfield programs and other CIPs, I'm going to say it's approximately 7 or 8 of them.
7,
At
8?
least half, yeah.
Okay. And how many have you been involved in as far as crafting or helping to craft? Through the chair.
Niagara Falls, Welland, Fort Erie, or Coburn. Pretty much all of them except St. Catharines.
And through the chair, the impetus for these municipalities to engage your services, to engage the process of having a brownfield CIP, if you can give me an overarching theme, what was the purpose? What was the intent?
Good question. Through the chair, this all started back in 2002, 2003, when I was basically retained by the region of Niagara to develop overarching programs to promote things that were important to the region. Brownfields, downtown redevelopment, intensification, housing, and heritage. And brownfields was the #1 priority then. I think it still is now. And the idea was that the region would offer programs that the local municipalities could take advantage of through CIPs. So the municipalities who wanted to come along on that ride and promote brownfield redevelopment could adopt brownfield CIPs, and that's exactly what happened. So that was the impetus. It was top down, which I applaud the region for doing because it's not often that way. It's usually the local municipalities clamoring for this. So it was an initiative of the region top down, and that's why those local municipalities retained me to prepare their brownfield community improvement plans as well as a number of downtown community improvement plans.
Okay, I appreciate those comments, and I won't be supporting this, number one, for a few reasons. Number one, specifically, I do believe that we should embrace the skill set that Mr. Piccione brings to the table. This is a gentleman that's been involved in the process for a very, very long time, not only here at the region, but our lower tier municipalities. Secondly, I seriously believe that we are overregulated. We are overregulated in this province, specifically the development community. And if I could find a CIP for archaeological, then that'd be on my wish list as well. But when you look at developing properties within the urban boundary, limiting urban sprawl, trying to preserve green spaces, you have to provide predictability. You have to provide that predictability, and you have to provide that certainty to the development community come in there and spend their money in order to redevelop these properties. Thirdly, we have a long-lasting legacy of industry in Niagara, and the industry occurred at a time when there was no regulation, when there was no oversight as far as discharge, as far as what the particular product or contamination was coming forth. So that uncertainty needs some kind of predictability, and at the very least, if we can incentivize the development community to do something with those properties, I think it's very valuable. I won't be supporting this for a few reasons. Number one, I've spoken specifically to Dan Gabriel at Mars Homes, and he has assured me that the brownfield CIP works. And I'm not about to start penalizing the development community that have played by the rules up to this point. Now, I understand, Mr. Chair, I understand that sometimes the rules change, but there has to be consultation and there has to be thoughtful collaboration with our partners to make sure that if the impact, or if there is going to be an impact, we have to minimize it to the best that we can. So I'm hoping going forward, if this is approved, that the collaboration is there with our development community, with our lower tier municipalities, with the Niagara Home Builders Association, and we can come up with some kind of agreement. But as it stands right now, I fully support the skill set that Mr. Piccione brings to the table. I fully support the developers that came forward, played by the rules, and now, unfortunately, they will be impacted by a different set of rules. One last further question for Mr. Piccione. Moving forward, how great of a leap of faith is it for a developer to take on a particular property without knowing what the contamination level would be?
Through the chair, developers do their due diligence, and especially developers like Lozani Homes, by doing a phase 2 environmental site assessment and doing a good one. In a lot of other Ontario municipalities, there's actually funding for that. Here, unless there's a CIP in place that offers that, and there's a few, they don't even get funding for that. So unfortunately, sometimes those phase 2 ESAs are not perfect. You can Swiss cheese a site and you can still miss something. You can miss something in the groundwater, you can miss an underground tank. So, these projects are at the absolute maximum of difficulty as far as development projects go. And the developers who take them on are taking an inherent risk. The problem is when you pile on top of that the risk of a $7 million or $14 million incentive disappearing, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole if I was Lozani Homes. They need certainty, and that's why they embarked on this project because they thought they had it.
Okay. Thank you for those comments. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Councillor Height.
Yes, this is to staff. Thanks. No questions. How does this compare to other communities across Ontario? The new changes to the development charge bylaw?
Through the chair, we have our consultant who has a much broader scope of it, and so if it's possible, we'd prefer to defer to Watson.
Sure, I'd love to hear that if I may. I think this is critical in the discussion.
Gary, if Gary can come to the podium.
Before I make any comments on.
Gary, welcome. Did you hear the question, sir?
I think the question, yes, through you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, through you to the presenter, the gentleman.
I think the
I'm looking at comparisons. Over the years, we've offered incentives, and they work to some degree, and not to a great degree in some cases, but how are they compared to other communities across Ontario?
I'd probably say that the predominance for municipalities is to deal with the incentive programs outside of the development charge bylaw, so that the development charge bylaw quite often is silent, and then they'll have programs in which to provide some type of grant program or some type of access to other funds to reduce the cost. I think they do that because sometimes it's very difficult within a development charge. You know, you have to put in definitions and such, and I know some municipalities have, or councillors have wanted to incent a certain type of development, but then others tend to slide in accidentally or because the definition was too broad. So a lot of municipalities have moved towards programs that are outside the development charge, so they can custom tailor, they can interpret, they can direct the money to specific projects that they want. Now, saying that, there are municipalities that do have exemptions in their bylaw, and in those particular cases, they probably don't have a parallel grant program. They've just done it through the DC bylaw. But I think the direction is to put that policy alongside of a number of other policies, so you have a comprehensive set of policies that are dealing with brownfields and different types of redevelopment.
So to get an answer, how does this compare to Milton or Hamilton or London area, this DC, the changes in the DC charges?
How does this particular? It varies. Some of the municipalities don't have anything in those bylaws as an exemption. As I say, they'll deal with it.
So they'll deal with it on a CIP program versus a development charge.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. I'm agreeing with a lot of the speakers that the development industry needs certainty. There is no question about that. You don't get into a game and then change the rules halfway through. But I don't believe that we just do it forever. We've had a program, they knew it was coming due at the end of 5 years. A grandfathering makes all the sense in the world in my mind, but just to throw this out and say, forget it. Yesterday at water, when we're dealing with water and wastewater, we found, I believe $800 million needs to be spent in the next 25 years in Niagara. And we're counting on close to 500 million of the 800 million out of DC charges. Well, if we don't collect them here going forward, we've got to then put it on all of our taxes. Well, then we'll deal with budget time and say taxes have to go up 3% because we're not collecting enough development charges. So we can't give away money both ways. We can't be good to the everyday taxpayer and saying we're going to try to keep it at a low percentage and give money to the developers and say, you know what, we're going to waive all charges. We've got to collect some of these charges. When I was playing with the numbers, and it's not a game, I was looking at the numbers, and there's 1,100 units, and you're looking at the additional cost to Lozani Homes. It would add another $8,000 or $9,000 per unit for the purchaser, whether the developer decided to eat it, and they shouldn't, or the purchaser has to pay more. Well, they're in a lucky situation that we're all in right now, is the market has gone up dramatically in Niagara over the last few years. And therefore, it probably won't affect them as much, but I still believe grandfathering of a year and a half isn't enough time, as we're hearing. In Fort Erie and in this development, we're hearing they need 5 years. And this gentleman says he'd like to come back to the next council if they can't do it in 5 years. The incentive idea is to motivate developers to build quickly so we can generate tax revenue. We just can't say, oh, don't worry about it, you've got forever. And when we're talking about brownfield development and the uncertainty when you're going into the ground, I can recall a property on Catherine Street when I was at St. Catharines Council that was industry. The property was cleaned up to a point that we thought a developer could build homes. And we found, or when they did the digging again, they found some more contaminants, and it could never be sold for development for, I couldn't say never, they'd have to dig too deep and it was gonna cost too much money, so they walked from the property. That doesn't generate tax revenue to St. Catharines or Niagara, and that hurts. So it's important to have developers willing to do the work, clean up the old properties, because we've got lots of factories throughout Niagara. I'm not sure how many there are, but I know Welland, I know St. Catharines still have, I know Thorold, a number of properties. We've got to, we're forced to clean up the property. We can't afford to do it. If the developers can do it, we've got to give them incentives to do it. So the grandfathering of a number of years, I'd be in favor of. Throwing this out and saying, let's leave everything for the next 5, I'm totally against. We've got to generate revenue. And so the next person coming forward 6 months from now, a year from now, buying property, they're going to know, here's the new game, folks. Here are the rules for the next 5 years. You've got 5 years to buy the land, start cleaning it up and developing. Otherwise, you're going to have to pay more. So I'm in favor of moving forward today, because we're going to get more information. But when we come to working on the bylaw, I'm looking forward to some grandfathering of properties that are already being worked on.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Volpatti.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say I'd support the grandfathering, but certainly not the extension for a longer period than that, or a change in what has been suggested. So I could vote this down because it doesn't contemplate grandfathering, and would support an amendment that would contemplate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor D'Angelo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too would support grandfathering, but not to be sexist, we could also grandmother it also. Just wanted to point out, incentives do work, and Mr. Luch, I remember you spoke of 2002. I was on Thorold City Council when we did the first CIP, first brownfield cleanup. That was the paper mill, the derelict paper mill on Front Street. That was the biggest eyesore that anyone could think of in a downtown. And through the brownfield incentive program, that was reformed, retransformed, has residential, mixed use, it's got commercial now. It created quite a bit of employment opportunities. And that was 2002. So if you go to downtown Thorold right now, 2017, it's the transformation is unbelievable in terms of what's being constructed down there. There's actually a project that's going to have underground parking. Who would have thought a building in Thorold would have underground parking? But that's where you've come, and it all started with that one project. If that project didn't move forward, nothing else would have probably happened down there. It started a huge transformation. Go down there and take a look. There's about 4 or 5 buildings that are being built right now. Some that are being knocked down, reused. So the incentives do work, and those projects that are coming forward now are less incentivized than the original. So there's still some work between the different levels of government to make sure things happen, but it's not to the extent that it was back when the first project started. So again, grandfathering does make sense, giving certainty to the developers, because these take a long time, especially cleanup costs. I know, being involved in projects here at the region, even the police headquarters, when they built it in Niagara Falls, they found an underground oil storage tank there that caused problems. No one anticipated that, but it does. So there's always stuff that pops up, and there's going to be additional costs that you don't anticipate. Every single property, I've seen that happen, especially when you're dealing with brownfields. I know Councillor Augustine talked about the blight of these properties. Niagara did not develop in a very comprehensive way. So we have these industrial buildings right next to residential zones, and you have a lot of mixed use issues. Even if you're trying to transform that building back into an industrial or commercial entity, it's surrounded by neighborhoods, parks. We have a lot of that going on. So when you can clean some of these properties up, turn them back into residential, you eliminate the mixed use, you don't have trucks going through the neighborhoods, and then develop those type of properties in certain areas that we have CIPs for the industrial zones, make a lot of sense because you're cleaning up some of the planning problems that were done in the past. I think a lot of that works. So I won't be supporting the way it is right now, but I think if we could tweak it, I think we could all come out benefiting from this. And again, the question I asked is, I want to make sure that we give the message that we're open for business and working with the development, working with people that want to invest in Niagara. We can't send them a message saying, you know, we're going to change the rules halfway through, because they'll never come back here again. Any business person in their right mind will not do business in Niagara if we start changing stuff halfway through and the project's moving along. Let's work together, streamline it, that both parties end up winning at the end of the day. And I think that's more important for the image of Niagara, which has been taking a beating lately. We need to make sure that it's out there, that a lot of positive things are happening here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question. Chair.
Sorry, Chair, can we ask the recommendations be split and voted separately?
Yes, recorded vote has been asked for as well. Chair Cousin, did you have, okay. So I'll look to the clerk when ready.
I will just ask for clarification about what we're doing, just so all the people voting will understand what your intent is here.
So I'll ask Councillor Quirk, the second point is just the circulation. You wanted that separated from point one?
Well, I think this report just asked that the transition provisions be included when we set out the draft regional bylaw, and I think there was some discussion about maybe there should be different transition period provisions provided. So I think the opportunity to vote that down, but the report itself should continue to be circulated with or without the transition provisions that we come up with.
Okay, so look to the clerk when ready to vote on point one.
The vote is open.
Okay, that did not pass. Now, again, I'll look to the clerk to open the vote for the second point on the circulation. Chair Cousin, go ahead. Yeah, thank you. If we can finalize that part. The report.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. We put that
Should we not deal, if we're going to deal with a possible amendment, wouldn't it be better putting the amendment in and then circulating it with the amendment as opposed to circulating the report and then going through a process of potentially amending it, from what I hear from the members that are in this committee?
I'll look to the clerk.
Through the chair, when the clerk's office does the follow-up for this particular report, what will be included in the letter is the final decision of council, whatever that may be, and a copy of the report. So it is in order to deal with the second clause here right now. Whatever the committee ends up recommending to council and whatever council ends up ratifying will be included in the letter.
Okay, so we'll finish the vote and then I'll look to Councillor Campion for a suggestion. Okay, circulation of the report is carried. Councillor Campion, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chair. I would like to put in to continue with the current RDC reduction program for 5 years. I think that's the proper wording that I had before.
Okay, so that's in essence alternative number 4 that we discussed. Chair Caslin, seconded by Chair Caslin. Perhaps we'll get the appropriate wording on the, is that satisfactory, Councillor Campion? Okay, it has been duly moved and seconded. Are there any questions or comments to this motion, Councillor Quirk?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure that we're clear that the direction that we're providing by going this route is that we want the exact program that we have currently to stay in place, and that's my understanding of it, as opposed to grandfathering existing projects. So I'm prepared to support this, but I do think that there has to be a further discussion about the use and the impact of the brownfield incentives, and I hope that at a future committee meeting, either at Planning or Corporate Services, Economic Development Department can bring us a fulsome report on the impact of brownfield development and how it's happened since it's been in place since 2004.
I'd encourage committee members, please use the speakers list. Councillor Volpatti.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to refer this amendment to staff so we can get a report on the, so we can get a cost analysis of this over the next 5 years, for the next 5-year period.
Okay, so the referral motion is in order, moved by Councillor Volpatti, seconded by Councillor Burrows. There's no discussion on referral except perhaps time frame.
Well, obviously as soon as possible, because
The new bylaw has to be in place or
right by the end of
August.
I would before the end of June for sure. In the next couple of weeks, please.
Question on timing?
Timing? Go ahead, Councillor Quirk.
My understanding, does the bylaw, when it's approved, have to be posted for so many days? So do we have to not work back 45 days from August 31st?
Commissioner Mustachi, with respect to the time frame that Councillor Quirk just asked about, 45 days.
Is there a posting period before it can be formalized?
Yeah. And I'm being told there's a public meeting that has to occur as well in between there.
60 days.
There's one scheduled. So I'm going to refer to the clerk just for a moment, excuse me.
Through the chair, I just wanted to advise the committee that there is a public meeting scheduled for June 8th on the proposed development charges bylaw and background study. It's been advertised, and we do have speakers registering to speak to them.
So I guess my question would be, can staff have that cost analysis prepared for the June 8th meeting?
Well, so it still has to be, it should be approved by committee and council before a public meeting, so they know that what's being suggested. So I think we've heard enough about the timing. The timing constraint does provide some problems, I guess, on a timing perspective. So the referral motion is on the floor. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, please keep your hands up. Recorded vote on referral. Look to the clerk to open the vote when ready.
Yep, we've got to make the time, that's all. Is that? No, we're voting on the deferral, so.
Referral.
Whatever.
Okay, it has been referred to staff for an additional report to be brought back as soon as possible. Councillor D'Angelo, go ahead.
Chair, this is just a staff direction. I know the last motion talked about sending it out to the Chamber of Commerce. Thorold does not have a Chamber of Commerce. They have a greater Thorold Business Council. Can we make sure that's included as part of the Chamber of Commerce distribution, just so that we would get hung up on just going to chambers? Thank you.
Thank you, that's been captured. Okay, with that, we do have other business.
Sorry, point of order, Chair.
Quirk, go ahead.
We just passed a motion that the report be received, and that we've now taken out any transition recommendations within the report, and we've also said we're going to circulate it. Does that mean that the commentary at the June 8th meeting will be based on the charge bylaw as it stands without any transition provisions? Is that how you would interpret that?
I would look to the commissioner perhaps to have a discussion around what that public meeting looks like if there's no recommendation on the floor yet.
There is a recommendation, receive the report and circulate it without Appendix 1 and transition purpose.
But not approved. Yeah.
That's right. There's no transition portion of it, right?
Correct.
The motion reads that it be received, be circulated without transition purpose program.
Okay. Acting Commissioner Burgess?
Through the chair, the public meeting would still discuss the background study of the DC and the current draft DC bylaw that's there. There would just, this is a public meeting, and therefore there, you know, I think they could discuss it, but it wouldn't be formally tabled with regards to the transition provision.
But, and again, this public meeting is taking place before our council meeting on the 8th, so the minutes of this meeting are not going to be ratified before then anyway. So what was staff intending to present at the public meeting?
Yeah, the transition policy as not approved, nothing's been approved, neither has the bylaw been approved, so it's all in discussion at this point in time anyways.
So would it not be prudent at that point to have options for transition to discuss at the public meeting? So we've already decided so far that we don't like what was recommended by staff. Maybe there should be some options presented for the transition so that people can discuss the benefits and pros and cons of each transition process?
Through the chair, there was 3 options provided in the analysis, and that was the intent, was to discuss the different options at that point in time. There was no binding requirement on this report. It was just to put it into the public forum.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have other business, CSD 13, budget control bylaw. Sorry, who?
From the floor.
Oh, you know what, no, I don't think so. I'm sorry, we're moving along. It's been referred. There is a public meeting, there will be a council meeting, so. I encourage you to have a discussion with Councillor Campion afterwards. It's out of order now to even discuss it. The CSD 13 is the budget control policy bylaw. Is there a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Volpatti, is there a seconder? CSD 13. Councillor Gale? Thank you. Let's get it on the floor.
You knew I was going to ask about this.
Yes.
Sorry.
Councillor Augustine on the budget control bylaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It seems the bylaw seems sort of a little nondescript and it points to other policies and things, but there was a portion that I found quite interesting, and that's under 6.5 and I guess 6.6 in terms of budget adjustments. It's saying that there can be a budget adjustment by staff up to $1 million without council approval. Can we hear what that amount is now?
Thank you, Acting Commissioner Burgess.
Yeah, through the chair, we don't move dollars around currently.
Okay, so we're going from 0 to $1 million?
Through the chair, yeah. It aligns with the same decision criteria, delegated authority on a single source.
Can that be clarified, please?
But it doesn't increase, it has no impact on levy, just to be clear. So we're not increasing overall budget, it's budget adjustments.
Mr. Chair, I jumped right in. So can we hear from staff what a budget adjustment means, what they have in mind, why they can't do what they want to do now, and why they're recommending this change?
Ms. Chamberlain.
Through the chair, currently, well, actually prior to the implementation of our EFMS and the new technology with commitment control, when we had any kind of a budget variance within a particular department, if we were able to mitigate that variance at a corporate level, we would do so corporately and by way of communication of our quarterly results to council. Actual dollars, the variance might exist in one department and the funding may exist in another that could offset it corporately. As we move through to commitment control, we have a system that is very robust and gives us the capability to manage our variances as we go. But what that also means is that if a variance occurs in a department, if they need to spend for an appropriate reason, those dollars would need to be in that department. So we would physically have to move the dollars around. So what we're recommending is that the ability to be able to just move without no increase to the levy, no change to debt, no change to levy reserves, et cetera. This would all be within pre-existing budgets to move those dollars around up to the $1 million, which, as Mr. Burgess pointed out, is consistent with the procurement policy. So we've tried to create some kind of alignment with the fact that up to $1 million, the procurement policy has certain rules that are delegated at the staff level. So that would permit us to be able to function and continue to issue payments and leverage the capabilities of the system. Previous to this policy, as I said, it was just done corporately, created a lot of additional offsite administration and certainly wasn't manageable. The only extent to which we would do budget adjustments was if we received funding from external sources that was no net increase to levy. So say the province provided us another $1 million grant, we would increase the budget by the revenue by $1 million, the expenditure by $1 million, so that we could permit that funding. And that was consistent with the methodologies that were in place for capital spending, which was embedded in a capital asset management policy. But prior to this policy, we have not had the same comprehensive documented practices and policies for the operating budget, and we're trying to facilitate that with this policy for ease of reference of staff.
Thank you. Can you give me an example of when one might do this, or
Through the chair, you may recall last year we had the Helena Street spill. And in Public Works, we had approximately $3.5 million worth of expenditures. And we came to council with the disclosure of that information as it was an emergency and a special circumstance. Rather than fund it from reserve or wait to the end of the year, we knew that there was some other surpluses that were being realized through other operations that could mitigate, and we waited to the end of the year. However, under our new system, we would be prevented from being able to make that expenditure in Public Works because that budget didn't occur in that line item. So we would have to physically go out and grab those dollars and make that expenditure feasible.
Thank you. The example given, Mr. Chair, is more than the million. Can we have an example less than $1 million?
Through the chair, there's sometimes programs that get developed where there are costs, and we are moving from one department to the next. So the key that you have to remember is this is based to some extent on the fact that the new PeopleSoft system has very rigid controls over the approval of POs, where before, which is great, and which is what we like, it also tracks where all your total commitments are. So even if you haven't physically spent something, but you've put a PO out, you've encumbered your budget. So we have very good clarity on that. But if, for example, if, for example, we know we're not spending money over in economic development, which is a different department with a different commissioner, and there's a need for less than $1 million in another department to execute something else that council has requested, right now, before, we would just do that internally through a bunch of emails. Now what we're saying is when you program the system to allow those approvals, you need to have very strict rules on who's allowed to approve within the system. And what this is saying is we're doing the same rules for purchasing. So if Carmen had decided to move some budget around, which is similar to his authorization for his reorg, which is less than $1 million, but to move those budget dollars around, there needs to be appropriate authority recognized in the system to move those dollars around. So when council approved that reorg, there was dollars that needed to be moved, and we're doing it within those authority levels of purchasing.
Okay, thank you. So when we look at 6.5B, is that under item 3 where it says to adjust the budget to affect the FTA change? Oh, no, that's FTA changes. I guess what I'm worried about, Mr. Chair, is if we suggest this, so this is BI, budget adjustments greater than $1 million require council's approval to adjust budgets between departments with approval of appropriate commissioners. What I'm worried about is the I don't want to say paper trail because I know it's all electronic now, but the tracking. We want to make sure that if there are these adjustments made, that our auditor is happy that they occurred appropriately, there's sign off, there's all this kind of thing. And I'm still a bit confused because we don't, Mr. Chair, we don't really have an example. We have a what if. So I'd like to know some concrete examples of times when they use this. How often will this be used? You know, those kind of things. And so as long as there's a reference here to say, okay, if it's, I don't know what, I can't remember what the numbers are, 250,000, you need a director's sign off. If it's 500,000, you need a commissioner, or whatever that sign off thing is. I don't know if that needs to be embedded here, but I want it to be crystal clear that if we are following this corporate delegation of authority policy, that also the sign-offs are very, very clear that that's followed. I don't see that on that $1 million line. It's just saying, oh, you need budget council approval. Can we just hear more about that, Mr. Chair?
Through the chair, so a lot to unpack in that question. So one is on the audit trail question. That's frankly the purpose of having this policy, is to support the audit trail and the authority levels to make those changes. There are lots of examples. I had a minor consulting assignment last year, you know, that I needed to use money from you know, from communications. The CAO approved that to move $10,000 over to do a consulting assignment. But up until this point in time, there hasn't been that. So what we wanted to do is entrench that in a bylaw that says, here's what are the policies to allow those changes to happen. As far as the authority levels, they are to mimic the procurement bylaw, and in the procurement bylaw, there is a very distinct chart in there with very precise levels on who can make those things. So by the time you get up to $1 million, it's the CAO sign off with the commissioner, with a treasurer, and with the appropriate levels up to that. And that below levels, it's done at, it goes down to commissioner, then director. So it's very embedded into the procurement bylaw.
That's buying things. This is moving things, moving dollars between departments. And so, Mr. Chair, I hope it's a friendly amendment, but something like in this, I think it's again 6.5BI, to adjust budgets between departments with approvals of appropriate commissioners and CAO up to $1 million. I think following, just language they're saying following the corporate delegation authority policy, something like that, that would then make it crystal clear that you need, again, if it's 10,000, you only need so-and-so to sign it. If it's 250,000, you need 2 people, whatever it is. I think it just makes it clear, and I appreciate the clarity that staff are providing on this, because as I read it, I was quite concerned. And I did forward them information ahead of time that I was going to ask questions on this. So if that can be added, Mr. Chair, as a really just a friendly, just to clarify that sign off is going to be used, I'm happy with it now, given the explanation that we've received.
Through the chair, what I'll try to do between now and council is put the authorization chart from the procurement bylaw into the bylaw and refer to it, so that when it goes to council, it'll be clear what the authorization levels are, and they're embedded and tied between the 2 bylaws.
That's great, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the help of the commissioner. The next one is 6.6. I think this is about the FTEs. Is this where it is? No, sorry, it's item 3 there. Oh, there it is. To adjust budget for the effect, it's right following that. So it's B, 6.5B, triple I. To adjust the budget for the effect of FTE changes as per the corporate delegation of authority policy. So that's the language there. Again, this is what wasn't clear to me, and again, maybe it's in that policy, I was trying to look it up, is essentially that council has to approve FTEs, any additions of full-time equivalents. And there is a reference in here about 35 hours, 40 hours, 30, whatever it is. Can we hear whether that is occurring there in B triple I?
So through the chair, council approves the total FTE complement and any incremental change to the total FTE complement. This provision would be between departments. So if we reduce an FTE in public works and add the FTE in economic development, this gives the authority under those levels to not change the overall FTE complement that council has approved, but to move FTE between departments. And my much smarter colleague to my left has reminded me that there is a quarterly report that, or semi-annual report that comes to council that reconciles all those changes. We've been doing that in the past. What this does is crystallizes the authority to undertake that internally, and it makes it more clean on who the authority is.
So again, this is, well, it's the authority, but this is adjusting the budget to do that. If you move somebody from public works and put them into public health or whatever,
Yeah, so you have to move
adjusting the budget to do that through this.
That's correct.
And so if if you move, I don't know, 10 people from public works and put them over into public health, you'll need council authority to do that because it's arguably, okay, 20 people, so it's over the million, you need council authority to do that. Is that how I can think about this as well?
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, if you did an FTE, if you did a total FTE budget move that was more than $1 million, you are correct. You would have to come to public works. And just so council understands, because our budgets, especially around payroll, are, you know, very much to the dollar, what happens with the system is you're not allowed to do anything if you exceed your budget. You get cut off by the system. So therefore, the authority to add money into the system is very important for us to continue on kind of day-to-day activities. So it seems a little, maybe I'll use the term mundane, why we're asking for these things, but because we've got now very tight controls in it, once you're over $1, once you're $1 over your budget, you're cut off. You can't put another PO through. You can't do anything.
That's good. Thank you. And then the final one is on the same one, but it's VIII. To adjust the budget for approved multi-year operating project when the annual costs are forecasted to exceed the annual budget, but the cumulative expenditures will not exceed the total project budget. So multi-year project, it's a 4-year thing that we're going to do with GO, whatever it is, something like that. And we're going to spend a lot of that up front, but it's exceeding the sort of a quarter of it. That's how I'm reading it. But you're saying, well, it's okay because we know we're going to phase some people out at the end of the project. Is that how I should be thinking about that? And if so, how do you know that you're not going to exceed the total project budget?
So through the chair, good question. Yes, that's how it is. So let's say we planned on a 4-year project that construction would start in 2020, but it actually started in 2019 because we were a little quicker. So our 2019 budget would be higher because we have construction costs, but the total, oh, sorry, yes. Okay, sorry about that. So if you hired consultants earlier into a project that was an operating project and the start date was earlier, but the total length of the project is still going to be the same, you'd end up moving budget from 2021 to 2020. And therefore, the total budget, and how you know you're not going to exceed it is because the way the system works, it's commitment control. So once I put in the $500,000 consulting PO, right, which is for 2 years, the budget, $500,000 of the whole budget gets chewed up at that point in time. So if I had $1 million budget and $500,000 was supposed to be for consulting, as soon as I put the PO in, the budget is encumbered for the full amount. So I know all my encumbrances all the way through the process. So it's been a bit of a quantum leap for the organization with PeopleSoft, which is what we wanted. We wanted this commitment control.
Okay, thank you very much. With that change, I'm satisfied, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate staff answering the questions and committee's indulgence on me asking them. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Alexander. It was very important, so appreciate your questions there as well. Councillor Quirk.
Chair, could I yield my speaking position until after Councillor Volpatti, please?
So we'll move. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask if there's any provision in the bylaw for quarterly reporting on these adjustments. I think it becomes a bit of a concern that things are going to happen without council's knowledge through this bylaw. And so a quarterly report would just kind of be reassuring, at least for the first few years, that this is working to the effect that you wanted.
Yeah, through the chair, it's in the bylaw, and I think quarterly reporting is important for the overall financial control of the corporation, so that would be there. But I just do want to caveat, the FTE reporting is on a semi-annual basis, but the budget reporting would be on a quarterly basis.
All right, so it was the shifting of, what's been done. And so there's an article in the, if you could just give us that article, then I'll be satisfied.
You have any other questions, Councillor Timms, while they find the specific article?
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll move to Councillor Burrows, and when they're ready, they'll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm on sort of the same wavelength. We went into this terrific system to get control on a very big operation, and now that we have control, we're trying to get ways to get out of it. And so my concern is the reporting quarterly at least, because by the time we approve the budget as a council, we've got it pretty well identified. And any changes to that budget that we approve will affect us. We're not trying to stop operations. And so I'm supportive of this document, but I really believe that quarterly report's going to take on a whole new meaning of here's where we started, here's what's come up, here's why Commissioner Burgess needed 10 grand to do some other little thing down the road, and here's why we're not spending any money that we said we were going to spend. So it all becomes, this is fine, but the quarterly reporting is going to be a very important document, and I hope we treat it that way with FTEs and with moving money around the various accounts. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have a response?
Yeah, through the chair, it's 6.9 is the clause. The following rules shall be followed to prepare and submit in-year budget reporting. All in-year budget adjustments are reported to council via quarterly financial report, 6.9A. And I do concur with Councillor Burrows that quarterly reporting and the monitoring of quarterly reporting is very important for fiscal control of the organization. And I think, well, I meant as the governing body, that's you. So yes, I think it's very, very important fact that we'll maintain, and I think this will actually improve our quarterly reporting.
Can I just possibly add 6.9A, that quarterly financial report to Corporate Services Committee? Because I know there was a question, sometimes it gets forwarded to the weekly correspondence via email, and I'm hearing pretty clearly this committee is going to want to receive that formally. Okay, thank you. Councillor Volpatti?
Chair, is there anything time sensitive through you in this report?
Time sensitivity?
Through the chair, we just continue to run into problems when, so for example, when council approved the reorg, we run into problems around the authority to shift budgets around and the ability to spend money once you're over a budget. So it's not time sensitive, it just then we operate without strict rules that council has approved,
Right.
would be my comment.
So my suggestion would be that, I mean, this is a really critical report. My suggestion would be that we discuss it at our first meeting of the Budget Review Committee of the Whole, so that it gets the attention that it really needs.
Okay, so is that a referral or referral? You
Can
did
I
ask a
do
question?
that at this point? Yeah, I've spoken to it, but I'd like to refer it to our first Committee of the Whole Budget Review. Please.
So I'll take it as an order because you just asked a question on time sensitivity, which is fair with
Right.
respect to the referral motion. So that's in order. If there's a seconder to refer it to a budget committee, Councillor Quirk. All right, so there's a motion on the floor to refer this item to the Budget Committee in June. Any questions or comments on the referral motion? Councilor Quirk.
Question to the motion. I was hoping that maybe as part of that, staff could, I was going to ask to refer it back to staff for a more comprehensive presentation on the policy implications. Could I ask that that be part of the discussion there? That's not just presented, that's presented.
And information, yeah, if it's, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's, thanks, Councilor Burrows. Yeah.
Lunchtime.
To the clerk to open when ready. That's carried, thank you. So we do have CSD 35 debt authorization, 2017 debenture issuances. Is there a mover and seconder for that report? Moved by Councilor Volpatti, seconded by Councilor Burrows, thank you. Any questions or comments to this report? Just, okay, thanks. So seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. Moving on to CSD 39, that's the Award of Fairness Advisor. Is there a mover and seconder for that report? Moved by Councilor D'Angela, seconded by Councilor Gale. Thank you. Questions or comments to this? Councilor Gale.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. We remember the debate we had on this procedure last year, and I think we were saving about $300,000, more than $300,000 a year on this, and I salute Councilor Augustine and Councilor Edgar and Councilor Volpatti for the comments we had, and that was a democracy in itself. But to the answer to the first part of this, approving J.D. Campbell and Associates, I've heard nothing bad about them from all my people that advised me on it, so I'm pleased with that selection. My question is, and I talked to Commissioner Burgess before this meeting, and I said I'm going to be asking this question: tender as opposed to RFP. And I guess I get it, but with what we've been through, we're all going to be watching this, or especially I'm going to be watching this under a microscope and that. So if you can comment to me on it, because Commissioner, through you, Chair, to Commissioner Burgess, I just want to make sure that it can't go as a tender for low price gets it, as long as it's apples to apples on it, as opposed to an RFP, and we go through that whole procedure again. If Commissioner Burgess could comment, I'd appreciate it.
Commissioner?
Through the chair, there's always a choice for procurement. You can do it as tender. We tend to, and most other jurisdictions tend to do insurance as a RFP, due to the fact that you want to ensure certain quality of the insurance company that's providing the insurance. If you go tender, your only selection criteria is low price. Also, there is an inability to, and you also have to make sure that the criteria that you're sending out to the market that you're quoting on is exactly what you want. If there's slight variances to it, you kind of get trapped into a situation. But at that point in time, if council believes that insurance is a commodity where there is no service aspect to it, or there's no advice being provided by the insurance broker to it, they could consider it as a potential method of procurement. My suggestion is to that procurement type of decision would be part of the process that would be undertaken, and the decision to go RFP versus tender would be part of the process, which would be monitored by J.D. Campbell and Associates, which can be reported back. Or council can make the decision to say, no, it's a tender, and we should just go with a tender.
And I'm going to presume, thank you for that, I'm going to presume that council is going to agree that this should go as an RFP, and I understand why, and that because it rules out innovative ideas that came up in the last front of this. A question through you, Chair, is and again, you might take this as a harsh question, but maybe you should. Is there a change in staff that are gonna analyze this? Could you tell me the changes that, the comments out there, hey, it's same people approving it, are they just gonna go with the same people before if it's not the right people? If I worded that right. I hope I did.
Commissioner?
Through the chair, I don't exactly remember who was on the evaluation panel before, but there was a representative, our risk manager, who runs our insurance program, was part of the evaluation team. There was a representative from legal services on the evaluation team, and a representative from finance was on the evaluation team, and the advisor was also part of the evaluation team. My gut feeling is that the manager of risk would still be part of there. She has the most knowledge of insurance and is the most knowledgeable person procuring insurance. There would still be someone from legal, whether it's the exact same person or not. I'm not sure on that. That a lot of times depends on availability. And there'd be someone from finance. Again, might not be the same person, but it'd probably be someone from finance again.
And they recognize what we went through last year, and I don't want to micromanage, but I just want to make sure we don't go through it again on all these items. That a question that we had at that time, though, Chair, was having municipalities hop on this. Could you tell me what the response was to municipalities? I had heard from councillors out there that had said a lot of municipalities don't want to do this. And, well, I'm going to ask for your answer then, and I'll comment on it, please.
Through the chair, there was some uptake for potentially looking at it, but not on a pooled approach. There would be no one that would be interested, or there was very little uptake on where you pool your risks, and because different municipalities have different risk management programs. So for those municipalities, this municipality has a very good risk management program, where you have, though we get sued a lot and we get questioned a lot, we actually don't pay out a lot because of a lot of the processes that we have in place. And we also have a policy internally, frankly, that we defend our suits. There could be other municipalities that have a different philosophy, and therefore, if you do a pooled approach, you'd be kind of pulled into everybody's past history. So there was very little uptake on that. And then when you get into procuring specific insurances, there's different assets, there's different types of risks and exposures. It becomes a complex process. There was uptake into taking a look at it, where you do one procurement, but everyone runs their own insurance program. So therefore, you have one bidder bidding on 5 or 6 insurance programs at the same time, but they're all kind of individual, but one process. Okay. And there was, the issue with that is you have to line up everyone's termination dates to do that.
Okay, thank you for that. I know, for the same reason, when this first started, I said we'd save, I'd guarantee at least $100,000 worth of savings, and we're saving more than 300 a year. I'd guarantee savings for everybody if they did this, but it would take an innovative council somewhere to do this. It'll take one city to hop on this and show that they can save some money on it, but I question whether that will happen during my tenure here on it, so I'll just leave that out there. So, and just looking if I have any other questions. Nope, I'm just going to watch this process, and hopefully it's not the same thing that happened last time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gale. Seeing no further speakers to this item, I'll call a question. All in favor of the motion? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, 5.5 CSC C11-2017 regarding the Roy T. Adams Humanitarian Award. There is a confidential item with respect to the evaluation matrix under closed sessions. If there's no questions to that evaluation matrix, we can take the report as it stands, and I'll ask for a mover and seconder. I got a mover in Councillor Gale, a seconder in Councillor Annunziata. Any further questions to this? Councillor Annunziata, not to anything that's in the closed session? Okay.
I think I'm the only committee member that sits on that. I will avail myself of any questions that council may have.
Seeing no questions? Sorry, we just asked councillors to make sure this remains confidential until the official announcement, please. Seeing no further questions, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. I need a mover for consent item. We still have to follow 6.1, which is a memorandum from Director Wood. I have a mover from Councillor Easton to receive the report. I need a seconder. Councillor Edgar. Any questions of the report? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Brings us to other business, item 7.1. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or Mr. Chairman, sorry. The item 6.2 is a memo from Associate Director Mr. Meff regarding the positions of the ESSC regarding arbitration, among other things. I had asked that this was one item circulated in the Friday weekly correspondence. And I'd asked that it be put on this agenda so that we could receive the memo, and I'd ask that we recommend that Regional Council support the position of the ESSC recommendations. And perhaps Mr. Meff could go through the points, but my main concern is about the position on interest arbitration, which is on page 93 of the addendum. And it starts off by saying that over the past several years, arbitrated salary awards in the emergency services sector have consistently exceeded the rate of inflation, cost of living, and wage increases negotiated with other unionized staff in the same municipality. And then further down, there is a point that it is recommended that the process should allow for either party to request and receive written reasons for an arbitrator's award. And my concern is that we've seen a trend over the last few arbitrations where the arbitrators are simply listing their decision without going through any explanation of their rationale, any listing of what was asked by both parties and the reasoning that the arbitrator used to come to his decision. So my question to staff is that what does the Arbitration Act say about reporting, and therefore leading us to a need to endorse this ESSC position? And I'd like to see council endorse that before AMO, so that when we go to the AMO, and this will be an item for discussion in various sessions, and I'd like to be prepared and be able to share with the AMO that the Niagara region supports this particular group's position. So my question to staff is, what does the Arbitration Act at this point say? And would staff recommend that council supports this position?
Mr. Meffy?
So through you, Chair, the three pieces of legislation that essentially we follow here from a collective bargaining standpoint, Councillor Timms, is the HILDA, which is the Hospital Labor Disputes Arbitration Act, the Police Services Act, of course, that governs police, and the Ambulance Services Collective Bargaining Act for our paramedics and dispatch staff. And in each of those pieces of legislation, it currently says that the arbitrator, or in the case where there's an arbitration board, shall take into account or into consideration specific factors when making their decision. Unfortunately, and it lists out in most cases, it's 5 criteria, which I know this committee and council is aware of because we have talked about them before, but it takes into account about 5 criteria. In the case of the Police Services Act, it's about 7 criteria. But I guess in that package, in the memo, with respect to the interest arbitration piece, one of the things that is of concern right now is that the arbitrator or the board does not have to necessarily articulate his or her reasons, or at least articulate all of the pieces that they did consider, rather than it just says that they take into consideration. It doesn't necessarily have to articulate their consideration in their awards today. And that's one of the main concerns that the ESSC is pushing forward with AMO, to say that these awards would have detailed information, and that either party could ask, whether it's the employer or the association or union, would be able to ask to receive written reasons around all of the criteria that were considered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That does help I think, make my point that this council should endorse the position of the Emergency Services Steering Committee. And perhaps staff could enlighten or inform us of what that committee actually is. I see it referenced to Marco and Lumco, and a staff opinion on whether there's any, would you recommend that this council supports their position?
So through you, Chair, yes, Councilor Timms, we would support that. We sit on the Emergency Services Steering Committee as representatives to that committee, who reports up through the Marco Lumpco group and to AMO. And we, in consultation, do support the interest arbitration reform pieces that are articulated in the memo that was distributed on Friday. And we suggest that council does endorse those pieces, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then I move what's up on the screen and ask for a seconder and council support.
Thank you, Councillor. I just want to get clarity, at least the perception, that understanding that the Emergency Services Steering Committee is not a committee of the region.
Mm-hmm.
Can you clarify, if you care to clarify, committee of which body that is?
Well, perhaps I could ask staff to help me out with that. I think it's a collection of municipalities, not necessarily a committee of this region. Perhaps staff could clarify for us, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Metheny, would you know?
Yes, through you, Chair. Yes, that committee was formed through the Marco Lumpco group to specifically focus on the escalating costs of providing emergency services through municipalities, so whether it be police, fire, or ambulance costs. And that group currently reports to the Marco Lumpco group and up through to AMO. That's correct.
Okay, thanks. So, Councillor Timms, we'll just add the that is Marco Lumpco Committee.
Okay.
To clarify, it's not the regions. So your motion is in order, Councillor Timms. Is there a seconder for that? Chair Caslin, thank you. That is on the floor to receive and support the recommendations. Are you fine, Councillor Timms?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think members will have the opportunity to read these memos and understand what it is we're supporting by the time we get to Thursday's council meeting. So I'd appreciate committee support to at least get to take this recommendation to regional council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll be very brief. I support Councillor Timms on this, and until you've been through the arbitration proceedings, and I don't know if Councillor D'Angelo, were you at an arbitration proceedings with the police when you were on the board? I'm sorry. Yeah, okay.
Yes,
so he's been there too, and I support everything that Councillor Timms said on this, especially the part about giving the reasons. When I was a police officer, even the judges don't have to give reasons, and it drove us nuts when somebody was let go or whatever, and we didn't know why, and that wasn't fair. Now I'm saying this is not fair. There should be an explanation for everything we do and what anybody in government does. So I support Councillor Timms. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. There is another item brought here by Councillor Timms. I look to you, Councillor Timms, once again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This again comes from the Friday circulation list. And to read the memo, it says we will cease printing ads for bidding opportunities in the newspapers. And it does speak about a standing advertisement to let the public know that our bidding opportunities will be online only. And I just have to speak in opposition to removing our bidding from the newspapers. We often talk about how the public doesn't know what the region does. And advertising in the newspapers had been, I guess it had been the kind of the legislated requirement before the internet and before online became available. But it always stood out to me as a pretty simple way to inform the public what we're doing, because the advertisements are there for bids on the various projects. And I think we would talk about communications some years ago. We talked about consolidating all the advertising onto a weekly or bi-weekly page in the newspapers that said, the region is advertising for these reasons, these services. So it all came to one place. And it served two purposes. One was, of course, advertising for bidders. But secondly, it was a really simple way of communicating to the public what the region does. So I would not like to see us adopt this new procedure. And I would like to see us consider once again the approach of block advertising on a regular basis in the print media. Because we used to make newsprint across the canal here in Thorold. So that's my point. That's why I brought it forward. It seems to me a bit of a policy change rather than simply an operational change. Because I thought advertising in the newspapers and letting the people know what we do was a worthwhile policy and communications tool. Thank you.
Councillor Augustine?
It's not on this point.
Okay. Well, I guess that's fine. This is to be received, so I guess we'll formally receive it unless, Councillor Quirk, yours is to this?
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to suggest that we refer it to the Communications Committee, but if we're just receiving it, I'm happy to support receiving it at this time. So my point, contrary to Councillor Tim's point, was that we did have that discussion, this very discussion around the Communications Committee about how we could minimize our costs, reduce expenditures, and the fact that most organizations that are bidding on the services for the region are actually already using electronic services, and we're not getting that much interest through the print media anymore. So I think there's a separate conversation about sharing the information that we do as a region to the public at large, but in terms of bidding opportunities, the companies that bid on our services are already aware of it through our electronic means, and I would rather use this way and save this money if there is a opportunity to repurpose those funds into advertising what we do elsewhere. I'm happy to do it, but I think they're two different things. So I'm happy just to receive this for information and adopt this policy.
Okay, thank you. So we do need a mover and seconder for the receipt. If that's moved by Councillor Quirk, seconded by Councillor Volpatti. All in favor of receipt? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. Councillor Augustine, you have the floor for other business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a thought as we talked about, and I think it was Councillor Burrows talking about the quarterly reports, etc. I don't remember receiving the first quarter report for this year. Maybe it was in one of these Friday circulations. My understanding is that the region, because of a couple of things regarding the police, is over budget somewhere in the term of $4 million or whatever. So just looking for an update of the quarterly reports and where we're going to get the second quarter report as well so that we can know the financial position.
Through the chair, we are going to provide a brief overview on the June 15th Budget Committee of the Whole to show where we are to date, and then where some of our forecasts, and then also the 2018 forecast. So we will provide a brief update on the June 15th presentation.
Okay, and to the quarterly report and to the half-year report.
Yes.
I don't know if they've been circulated. I can't remember receiving them, Mr. Chair.
So the tradition, we don't do a Q2 report because our audited financial statements are being worked on at that point in time. So we do that, and then we will do it in, is it August? Yeah, it's August is when the second quarterly report comes out. The Q2 report.
Sorry, you said Q1. We don't do a Q1?
We don't do a Q1 because we're working on the audited financial statements for December 31st.
Okay, so we're going to get an update mid-June.
Mid-June, and then August timeframe for the Q2 report.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I get on that. Yeah, just on the follow-up there. With the EFMS system, will we be able to do Q1s moving forward regardless of auditors or not?
Through the chair, it's something that we would like to do. It's where we like to be at best practice. Currently, right now, our resources are a little constrained to produce both sets at the same level that we produce our quarterly statements at.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're still under other business. Quick comment and maybe some direction. Yesterday afternoon, Bill 139 was entered into the legislature in true omnibus fashion. It does encompass a lot of the things with respect to planning, but I would like to see if there's any budget implications. So specifically, amendments to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal Act, which will be in place of OMB, Local Planning Appeal Support Center Act, amendments to the Planning Act, the City of Toronto Act, and the Ontario Planning and Development Act, and as well as amendments to the Conservation Authorities Act. So what are the budget implications with the new language in Bill 139 that came out yesterday afternoon? I've already directed our staff at the Conservation Authority to go through the act and identify budget impacts to the Conservation Authority. But if staff here could be directed to do the same thing, or at least provide comment on any of those changes. I will be bringing this forward as well under planning, economic development planning as well, just to see what the implications would be as well.
Okay, it looks like staff are taking that as a takeaway, Councillor. That's fine. Thanks. Seeing no other business, will there be questions about any of the in-camera items this morning? Seeing none. So look for a mover and seconder to move and approve all the in-camera items. Moved by Councillor Quirk, thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Gale, thank you very much. And the opportunity for asking questions on those reports was in camera, so if there are none, I'll call the question on approval of the in-camera items. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you very much. And the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.